Hey, thank you for joining me. We've made it to number 7. Today we are talking about chakra 7, the crown chakra, using Anatomy of the Spirit, written by Dr. Carolyn Myss. She is a physician and medical intuitive and a very spiritual person who wrote a wonderful book giving us all these lessons about each chakra, how they connect with primary fears and strengths, how they actually have a correlation with the Sephiroth. It's a beautiful way to kind of understand each chakra. So we have made it to chakra 7, the crown chakra. And this is about our spiritual connection to the divine. It's a little different than the first 6 chakras, and we will learn about that as we go here. I wanted to add in this quote from Meister Eckhart that she also included in this chapter. God is love, and he who is in love is in God, and God in him. The 7th chakra is located at the top of the head or right above the top of the head, and it's our connection to our spiritual nature and our capacity to allow our spirituality to become an integral part of our physical lives and to guide us. So our whole energy system is animated by our spirit, but the crown chakra is, quote, directly aligned to seek an intimate relationship with the divine. Makes sense why this is the chakra of prayer. So the crown chakra is where we store what she calls our grace bank account. It's like a warehouse for the energy that we amass through our acts of faith and prayer, through our kind thoughts and actions, through our choices to live in alignment with our highest available consciousness. When we try to embody our Christ consciousness, our higher self, whatever you want to call it, this is where we are kind of generating that energy that we get from being connected to the divine. So this warehouse enables us to gain a rich level of internal awareness that we usually achieve through prayer and meditation. The energy connection to the physical body, when it comes to the crown chakra, it influences the major body systems, things like the central nervous system, the muscular system, and the skin. These are all big things. So the 7th chakra is the entry point for human life force. It sounds like it's kind of a big deal, right? So I don't know if you've ever seen a chart where it showed chakras having like this funnel shape, kind of like a horn where it's narrow at one end and open at the other. So the bottom root chakra is only open on one end, and it's open at the bottom. The chakras in between the root and crown have dual openings, so they look like a two-ended horn. They have a big fat opening on each side. The crown chakra, like the root chakra, only has one side open. It's only open to the top. So that's another way that it's different. It is only open to the top, and it's pulling in human life force. So that's what she's talking about for entry point for life force. She's meaning that it is it's the entry point, just like she says. So this life force pours endlessly into the human energy system from the greater universe, from God or the Tao. This force nourishes the mind, body, and spirit and distributes itself throughout the lower 6 chakras, connecting the entire physical body to the 7th chakra. Now, the energy connection to the emotional and mental body. This energy generates devotion, inspirational and prophetic thoughts, transcendent ideas, and mystical connections. The 7th chakra contains the purest form of grace or prana. This chakra warehouses the energy generated by prayer and meditation and safeguards our capacity for symbolic sight. It is a dimension of conscious rapport with the divine. Its primary fears include fears relating to spiritual issues such as the dark night of the soul. We're going to talk a lot about that actually. Also, fears of spiritual abandonment, loss of identity, and loss of connection with life and the people around us. These are the primary fears of the crown chakra. The primary strengths of the crown chakra: Faith in the presence of the divine and in all that faith represents within one's life, such as inner guidance, insight into healing, and a quality of trust that eclipses ordinary human fears. And the last strength that Dr. Myss lists is devotion, also a big part of this. When it comes to the Sephiroth, the tree of life in Kabbalah, the Sephirah connected to the seventh chakra is Keter, which means crown. Keter represents nothingness, the energy from which physical manifestation begins. When it comes to Christian sacraments, the Christian sacrament related to the seventh chakra is extreme unction or last rites, which is the sacrament administered to the dying. Symbolically, she says, this sacrament represents that process of retrieving one's spirit from the various corners of one's life that still hold unfinished business, or releasing regrets that continue to pull at one's consciousness. At the closure of our lives, she says, we consciously draw these memories to a final point, accepting the choices we made at the time and releasing the feeling that things could have or should have been otherwise. So this is what it means to call one's spirit back so that they can leave this world and return to the spiritual dimension complete. From a different symbolic perspective, Dr. Myss says, extreme unction represents a ritual that is actually useful to regular human life. Like the many points in our lives when we face a crossroads and we need to let a previous phase of our life die. I can agree with that for sure. The sacred truth of the seventh chakra. Seventh chakra energy motivates us to seek an intimate connection to the divine in everything that we do. This spiritual desire for connection is significantly different from the wish for connection to a religion. Religion, first of all, Dr. Myss says, is a group experience whose main purpose is to protect the group, primarily from physical threats such as disease, poverty, death, social crises, and even war. Religion, she says, is rooted in first chakra energies. Spirituality, on the other hand, is an individual experience directed toward releasing fears of the physical world and pursuing a relationship with the divine. The sacred truth of this chakra is live in the present moment. We have talked about that before, about don't let your spirit be in the past, don't let it be speculating on the future. All that you need to keep you on your path is right in front of you. Keep your spirit in the present moment. Everything outside of that is an illusion, basically. So, what does it mean to seek union with the divine? What do we do with this energy of the crown chakra? Dr. Myss believes that we have a conscious or unconscious prayer that goes something like this, usually when we're going through the dark night of the soul. I no longer want to be protected within the group, nor do I desire to have a mediator filter my guidance for me. I now want you to move into my life directly and remove from my life any obstacle, be it a person, place, or occupation, that interferes with my ability to form an intimate union with you. Seeking union with the divine means asking to have all physical, psychological, and emotional illusions removed from our lives. And once this process of removal begins, we awaken an internal voice of authority. This internal voice of authority immediately begins competing with every external authority in our lives. And this kind of inner turmoil can turn into, quote, spiritual schizophrenia. Ah, yes. When we hear people talk about the dark night of the soul, they're usually referring to the trials of the personal spiritual journey, and this comes from a book written in the 16th century by St. John of the Cross. His book, which is called Dark Night of the Soul, articulates the stages of separation from the tribal or group mind that are necessary in order to form a fully conscious bond with the divine. These stages involve mystical transcendence, which a lot of it's wonderful, but it also includes the feeling of depression, madness, extraordinary isolation that's just unknown to ordinary human experience. And the few who pursued connection with the divine beyond the religious parameters of understanding, they could separate from the group and find it by living the monastic life. They could seek their mystical experiences if they lived apart from people. And so they did look crazy from the outside, and other people would keep their distance because some of these people did go mad, and some would, nearly starve from fasting, and others fell into terrible depressions. And it became well known, she says, that few could endure direct contact with heaven. So, the symptoms of a spiritual crisis are almost identical to those of a psychological crisis, so they do get confused with each other quite often. That's happened in my case for sure. A spiritual crisis naturally involves the psyche. So when you start feeling these disturbances, if you're kind of a beginner to these, noticing what's going on, you might describe your dilemma as psychological. Oops. Little interruption there. Sorry about that. Okay, let me back up just a little bit so I can get into my place again. So these symptoms of a spiritual crisis are almost identical to that of a psychological crisis. And because a psychological crisis naturally involves the psyche, a beginner on this journey might describe their dilemma as just psychological. The symptoms of a spiritual crisis are, however, very distinct, and they are threefold. Dr. Myss says, the crisis usually begins with an awareness of an absence of meaning and purpose that cannot be remedied merely by shuffling the external components of one's life. Now, chronic complainers and people who lack ambition are not necessarily suffering from a spiritual crisis. Those who are suffering from a spiritual crisis feel a much deeper longing that cannot be satisfied by ordinary solutions, such as a promotion or a new relationship. The second symptom of a spiritual crisis is the appearance of strange new fears. Now, these fears are not typical worries like fear of abandonment or fear of aging. It's the kind of fear that makes someone think that they're losing touch with their sense of self or identity. A standard report from a person saturated with 7th chakra energy is this: I am no longer sure of who I am and what I want out of life. Hopefully she quits barking. The third symptom is the need to experience devotion to something greater than oneself. We biologically and energetically need to be in contact with a source of power that transcends human limitations and turmoil, says Dr. Myss. Devotion commits a part of our conscious minds to our unconscious eternal self, which connects us to a divine presence. Even brief and fleeting encounters, Dr. Myss says, with this presence and its infinite power to help our conscious mind release its fears of life, and human power ceases to command our attention. Let me read that again. I don't think I put the right inflection there. Even brief and fleeting encounters with this presence and its infinite power help our conscious mind release its fears of life, and human power ceases to command our attention. I think I got it that time. Our need to be devoted to a higher power has found numerous inappropriate surrogates. Devotion to a corporation, devotion to a political party, devotion to an athletic team, or devotion to a personal exercise program. We have so many little false gods. Much of our loyalty to these entities occurs because it contains an unconscious devotion. We expect our devotions, she says, to earthly things and people to return to us a quality of power that can take care of all our woes. But no human being or organization commands such power. No guru, minister, or priest can manage the level of devotees for long without some form of scandal. We are not meant to be devoted to a human being. Devotion is meant to be directed upward and to take us with it. The absence of meaning, the loss of self-identity, and the need for devotion are the three strongest symptoms of being in the dark night of the soul. While it's similar to psychological dilemmas that people experience, when the root of the crisis is spiritual, the person lacks the motivation to blame other people for causing the crisis. That's so key. They realize that the cause of the crisis is within. The inadequacy of the external components of the person's life is a consequence of the spiritual crisis, not the cause. Many of the challenges in getting through the dark night of the soul involve facing intense psychological issues. And while it can be useful to receive traditional counseling and identify those negative patterns in relationships and negative patterns in childhood, the priority here should be investigating the content of the person's inner dialogue related to matters of the spirit. And these type of inquiries would include things like asking, what questions have you asked that seek insight into your life's purpose? What fears do you have related to your understanding of God? Have you judged your life as meaningless when you evaluate it within a spiritual context? Are you conscious of ever having violated your own spiritual rules? These are not ordinary psychological questions. We can become more open to receiving the answers to them if we reorganize our lives in ways that remove mental and emotional blockages. Now, this reorganization at first makes us feel worse. And we experience the dark night of the soul as we come to know the contents of our minds and hearts, as we confront fears and beliefs, as we consciously pursue the shadow side and, quote, challenge false gods who do not give up their hold on the human psyche without a fight. Illness is often a catalyst of spiritual transformation and of the dark night. The upheaval brought on by a serious illness can return a person to prayer or meditation. Illness can also bring on the isolation that gives a person the space just to be alone with themselves and with God. So it makes sense. Dr. Myss recommends having a spiritual director as an aid during a dark night of the soul type of crisis. In the absence of a spiritual director, we can turn to spiritual literature. I will vouch for that. Enduring the dark night requires a lot of faith and a lot of prayer, and she also recommends journaling. Primarily, though, faith and prayer. Prayer needs to mean something to you that is just the purest form of connecting to the divine. It might not be what you were taught as a child to understand prayer as, but it's something that's very similar to just meditation and connection to the highest truth and purity. The quality of prayer, Dr. Myss says, is not measured in time, but in intention. If certain prayers bring you a sense of tranquility, then make those prayers a part of your daily devotion. What does healing through prayer actually mean? It means invoking the energy of God to grace us in a way that allows us to feel more powerful than the illness. And this reminds me of something like The Biology of Belief, written by Dr. Bruce Lipton, where if we have that belief that we can be more powerful than the illness, then we are affecting our genetics, epigenetics. Love Dr. Bruce Lipton. Dr. Myss, however, from Anatomy of the Spirit says, prayer represents one's conscious connection to God. Authentic prayer does not mean to turn to God in order to be with someone. Prayer is not so much our words to God as our life with God. When this is understood, then prayer becomes, quote, energy medicine. Lastly, I will give you a quote from Carolyn Myss, and it's all about just the journey in its entirety. Our goal on this earth is to transcend our illusions and discover the innate power of our spirit. We are responsible for what we create, and we must therefore learn to act and think with love and wisdom, and to live in service to others and all of life. Now, some reflection questions. I encourage you to get out a journal and jot these down so that you can spend some time with them and actually write out your answers. and let these thoughts walk around a little bit in your mind. When you are meditating or praying, what questions are you asking? What are you seeking guidance with? And what answers to these questions would you fear most? Do you bargain with God? Do you complain more than you express gratitude? Are you devoted to a spiritual path or higher power? And if not, have you found surrogates to be devoted to? Do you believe that your God is more authentic than the divine that's in other spiritual traditions? Have you started and stopped a meditation practice? And if so, what are the reasons that you did not maintain it? What spiritual truths are you aware of that you do not live by? List them, she says. Are you afraid of a closer spiritual connection to the divine because of the changes that it might trigger in your life? Well, guys, that concludes the series on the lessons of the chakras with Carolyn Myss's Anatomy of the Spirit. I may be doing one more video offering the meditation that she has at the end of her book, which is kind of giving you a focal point for each chakra, starting with the root and going up to the crown. I thought that it was pretty interesting, especially as a beginner tool to kind of get in touch with what thoughts, what visions, what feelings, what energy, to sum it up, do I want to invite and feel flowing and invigorate, as I kind of move up each chakra. And she's listed that out and made it very simple. And I think that that would be very useful if you're new to meditating, if you're new to understanding chakras, if you're new to the journey. If you just want some simple guidance, then, that's always refreshing just to have it simplified. So that's probably the last video that I'll make for Anatomy of the Spirit, and that'll be coming soon. Thank you guys for watching.